For today I have exciting news. Randomly on the internet I stumbled upon a Chess Engine's blog called Chess Engine's Diary, and I saw that Ferrous is actually mentioned there. So as you can see, it says Ferrous 0.4.1 new version Chess Engine, dated by July 8th, 2026. And as you can see, it's me, the author, and if we scroll down here, we can see the description right from GitHub. So that's exciting. I didn't expect my chess engine to get noticed this soon. But anyway, we go back to the video. In this video, I'm going to be showcasing the games of my chess engine's new version against another, a real opponent this time, shallowblue 2.0.0. You can see their estimate ratings, and the first game was nimzoindian defense with this uncommon move pawn to b6 apparently. So the game started already with shallowblue blundering some of the advantage with a move c5. And the reason why it's not optimal is exactly how Ferrous shows. So after we take the pawn and our bishop gets hit with a3, we simply take on d2. And even though we don't win a pawn, we technically get a slightly more pleasant position. Now we're threatening to play c5. And really we should have done it before putting the bishop on b7. But this way is also fine. Now we play bishop d5. And now rather than defending the pawn on g3, the pawn on g7, we play c5 here. And the idea is after queen takes g7 there's rook g8 and the knight is still hanging. So the knight has to move. And to an unprepared eye, this might seem like just a fork. And even if you castle, there's still knight c7. However, apparently after knight c7, you don't even care. Stockfish thinks that knight e4 is the best move. And we're not scared of queen a5 here because knight c6 and the queen needs to move again. But if queen f4, we take the bishop, the queen cannot recapture because it's overloaded, so the king has to take. And now we play knight c6, getting a lead in development. And now if white dares to touch a rook on a8, we play queen a5 check. Blocking is bad because the pawn is just getting lost there. So the most logical move is king to e3. And we don't even take the knight in the corner, instead playing c4. That's the first line of Stockfish, by the way. And now we're threatening queen c5, knight d4, and the attack that we're landing on the queen, on the king, is massive and unstoppable. The position is very risky for white, and I'm not sure if both sides saw that actually. But in this position, rather than playing knight c7, with shallowblue decided to play bishop h6, and after knight e8 just retreating. So the position of black seems to be a bit passive, but queen a5, pinning the knight, not allowing the bishop to get captured. b4 we're again not scared of, because the bishop is well defended. After e4 we pull the bishop back to b7, and this position is equal according to Stockfish, even though a certain amount of imbalance is present. Ferrous decides to trade the queens for no reason, and actually gets a slightly worse position due to this move bishop f4. They shuffle for a while, bishop h6, knight e8, and after bishop e3, Ferrous finally finds the move d6, reinforcing the pawn on c5, and e5 from shallowblue makes the position better for black. In such positions where you have a choice of taking the pawn, pushing the pawn, or ignoring the threat completely, you have to evaluate all the choices. For example, if you push the pawn, the evaluation, which is not shown for some reason, but if I run Stockfish for a while, it's going to be something like -3. And the reason for that is because the rook is dead, the bishop is staring into c5. This bishop cannot come out that actively on c4. The knight has no access to e4, and the queen doesn't see this diagonal completely. Whereas in the variation of taking, after queen takes, white gets a pretty pleasant position. Even though Stockfish thinks it's still equal, I think it's more pleasant to play this position with white. After knight d7, queen g3, we get king h8 to seemingly to not deal with bishop h6 anymore. And after bishop d3, we get a very aggressive f5. Now here, the only way to keep the position equal is to play knight b6. The idea is you're protecting both pawns and you're attacking the bishop. Instead, Ferrous decides to give away a pawn for no reason, playing f4. And after bishop takes f4, and now knight b6, but it's a bit too late because you already gave some material, and simply moving the bishop back, it was technically not the best move even. The best move was to play something like bishop a2, maintaining the bishop on a more active diagonal. But still the position is quite pleasant for white. Now we get rook f7, and here shallow blue blunders again with the move queen to e3. The advantage black gets is huge, and you can pause the video and try to find the best move. The best move is actually very simple, is to play knight g4. And the idea is you're attacking the queen and the pawn on f2 twice. So wherever the queen moves, for example here, you take the pawn on f2 first, instead of taking the queen. And now it's a fork on two rooks, and even though white trades the queens, it's still a fork. Black wins the rook, and it's not the end of the story, because after king takes d1, black manages to win even more material with rook to d8. It turns out that the bishop is pinned, and there's no good way to defend it. So white decides to lose it anyway. King e2, e5. And here's a small difference between engines and players on this level. I mean on the level of Ferrous. Most players play the move g6 because they want to save themselves against checkmate, and a move like rook d8 feels passive. Now the rook is stuck guarding the back rank. Even though it's not losing, it's just an inaccurate approach. But Ferrous continues pressuring the blue. Now this is a tricky move, attacking the bishop, and the bishops are both hanging now. Both sides move the bishop. Now I would just take the bishop. That's a nice simplification. Ferrous finds a different way to win. He gets his rooks on the second rank, and now he will probably eat all the pawns of shallow blue. Bishop d1, knight c4, and clearly the position is lost, and the last piece of puzzle that shallow blue gave to Ferrous is a rook trade, because now without a rook, white has no more counterplay, and rook d3 attacks both pieces now. So shallow blue has to lose the knight, eventually lose the pawn. Then Ferrous wins on h5. They shuffle for a while, trade the knight for the bishop, and after, again, a bit of shuffling, Ferrous finds the winning idea, which is pushing the pawn, and here, with a nice sense of humor, promoting to a rook and checkmating the king that is not even adjacent to the edge of the board. In this game, I forced them to play this system with b3 and e3, and this game was a pure masterclass of endgame. A lot of amateur players have trouble with endgames, including myself, so we all have a lot to learn from this game. Ferrous plays knight c3, shallow blue opens with knight c6, already a suboptimal decision. Normally, against the larsenattack, in most positions, move c5 before putting your knight on c6 is good. And here it's good especially because you played it like the d5 opening. Another way is to play knight d7, c6, but fine. As long as they don't blunder, I don't care. Bishop b5, bishop c5, and here Ferrous decides to trade off his bishop for the knight at the cost of damaging the pawn structure of the black's king side, which I don't hate, but what I hate is the next Ferrous's decision, knight h4. The idea is very simple to eliminate this bishop, but first of all, if the bishop just goes to h7, it's out of the attack, and this knight will always be under the x-ray of the queen. This idea also works, and it's quite annoying for white, because now they don't have the pawn break e4, as it's controlled twice by black, and the f3 pawn is pinned. So here Ferrous makes a positional mistake, I would say, d4. The reason why it's a positional mistake is because when the bishop moves, now the d4 pawn is stuck on d4. There's no good way to push it or eliminate it or trade it for an enemy pawn. If black is not stupid, they're never gonna play c5 or e5. And what white forgot here is that the bishop is standing on b2, and this knight actually doesn't have a very good route ahead. And again, e4 is not available due to the spin. So now white proceeds to also lose the knight to g5. And Ferrous here tries to prove that it's not a loss, because g4 is there. But after this trade, first of all, black just wins a clean pawn, and second of all, the king is wide open now. So we will expect moves like rook g8. e4, another slight mistake, I would say, not because Stockfish thinks it's bad, but because you really need to account for this attack upcoming. So a very logical move, which caught my attention first when I saw this position, is the move f4. It's a multi-purpose move. First of all, it blocks the bishop. Second of all, it slightly restricts the knight. And third of all, it doesn't allow the queen to join the attack this easily. So the queen might spend at least like 2 moves getting active. e4 though, I don't like, because now rook g8, king h1, and knight f4. Now white is in trouble. Technically knight f4 wasn't even the best way, but we don't care. Ferrous will not figure it out. So bishop c1, trying to eliminate the knight. A good decision, by the way. The bishop wasn't good in b2 anymore. And queen g5 just allows rook g1, and when a trade happens, the attack is over. So instead of that, what black should have done is probably played maybe a rook up and then tried to put the queen behind the rook. But Stockfish here finds another idea, which is h3. The idea of h3 is probably to glue one of your pieces to g2, likely the rook, and then put your queen in g5. That would be much better than how shallow blue did it. But black is still winning, so the execution is fine. Here, by the way, e5 doesn't win a piece, because bishop b4 counterattacking the knight. Here, white needs to be a bit careful. If they allow bishop b4 anyway, the bishop will take. For example, bishop b4, bishop defense, that's losing. Because bishop takes c3, and knight e2 is just a fork. So Ferrous chooses to play king h1. Although king f1 was perfectly fine, and it did the same thing, but anyway. Rook g8, blocking the king, that's exactly why you should have went to f1. And now bishop e3 finally getting active, a5, rook c1. I have no idea what this move does, but at least Ferrous is not blundering. f5, rook f1 this time, to maybe, after this trade, open up the attack on the knight. Bishop b4 finally happens, knight d1. And after kicking the bishop out, we play rook e1. And now $1 million question, do we trade like this? That probably would be fine. Although again h3 and rook g2, white might get in some trouble. So here Ferrous finds the best move, which is bishop f2. And shallow blue finds another idea, which is a sacrifice on g3 to the cost of trapping the bishop, and black also wins the third pawn for that knight. But surprisingly, the position is now equal. Until the next move, which is c4, which fails to realize that rook b8 simply attacks the b3 pawn, and now there's no good way to defend it, and black will acquire an outside passed pawn. However, Ferrous finds a way to trick shallow blue, and now the idea is if shallow blue takes, Ferrous takes on d5. So bishop before rook c1, and after making some moves, by the way, king g2, king h3 is awesome, trying to bring the king around to target these pawns, but rook e8 is also strong, forcing, threatening rook e1, trapping the bishop completely. So now you have to go back to c1 to prevent that idea, and now they repeat moves for a few turns, and finally Ferrous decides to make a breakthrough with king h4. They trade even more. a4. Now the position is equal in terms of material, but it's imbalanced. So white has this bad bishop, which is nearly trapped. e3 is the only safe square. Even from there, it's not that active. And black has 4 pawns, 3 for the bishop, and 2 passers. So white needs to keep track of both of them. So logically, go rook c2 to go rook g2. And here, the only winning plan for black is to run the king this way. So that the king goes, let's say, to b4, rook goes to c3, king b3, and the pawn promotion is supported without actually losing on g3. King e6 is the wrong way. Even though it prevents king e5 advancement, there is one idea for a draw for white, which is bishop e3, blocking the rook's vision on the pawn. Notice that if rook b2 happens, we take on g3, and after a2, we give a check on g6, the king moves, and we go around the pawn and stop it from promoting to a queen. That is insane. If rook b1, another tricky move, you just take the pawn with the king. You don't take with the rook because it allows a2, but taking with the king is perfectly fine. Rook b2 trying to trade rook g1, a2, and now the only move that doesn't lose is rook to a1, preventing black from blocking his rook from the defense of a1. And after c6, king f3, the position is equal. There's no way for either side to make progress in Stockfish's opinion. The way to make progress here, though, is to play bishop away and try to bring your king like this. So you shuffle for a while. It's very important to defend this pawn, otherwise these ones will start rolling. And now you bring the king. It's not winning or anything, but at least it gives some chances. And it looks like the bishop is trapped, but in reality there's king b2 attacking the rook. And if the rook tries to maintain the bishop in a cage, we simply take the pawn, and even though black wins the bishop, the position is drawn. And the reason for that is, in the positions of a rook and a pawn versus a rook and 2 pawns is usually drawn unless the 2 pawns are on the enemy side of the board. So for example, these 2 pawns have started on this half. If they're still there, it's a draw. If the pawns were here, then it would be winning for black. So instead, shallow blue decides to go rook a8, maybe trying to preserve any chances of winning, maybe just to shallow, to see the draw whatsoever. They shuffle for a while, sometimes almost repeat moves. Rook b8, now we take on a2, and shallow blue decides to trade the rooks. And now, I want you to pay attention to the evaluation bar. Here is only one way to make a draw. And the way to make a draw here, you can try and find it, by the way. It's a nice puzzle of calculation, is to put your king on this side, on the left side of the pawn, so that you can push c5 and trade off this pawn, which is the only source of counterplay for white. So the only winning move here is king to d3. And after something like king b2, king c4, whatever white plays here maybe other than bishop e7, then you obviously take on d4. But anything else that white plays here, you just play c5 with black, and it's a guaranteed draw because white cannot avoid this pawn trade. Instead of that, shallow blue plays king f5, and now it's winning. And now $1 million question: does Ferrous exploit the winning chance? Yes, it does. Bishop h8 is the best move, and after king e4, it's already too late, because now we bring the king, and the king is not here to go to c4. So now we bring the king around, and from the queen side, the king sneaks upon the c and d pawns. And that's the only reason it's winning for white. Also to the fact that they have the bishop and they can wait for as many moves as they want. For example, king d6 here is what shallow blue plays. Now we just give a check. King e6, we go king c5, attacking the pawn. The competitive way to play this position for black is to play king d7. Now, how do we win the pawn? That's very important. You need to put the king in something called a Zugzwang here. It's a position where no move maintains a draw or wins. One way to do this is to put the bishop anywhere where it guards this diagonal. For example, bishop h2. Now after you notice that the king has no way to defend the pawn anymore, so for example after king e7, we take the pawn on c6, king e6, we again put the king in a Zugzwang so that it can't guard the pawn. King e7 back, we take on d5. And with an extra pawn and a bishop, I'm pretty sure you can win this. Shallow blue, however, gave up very early, played king f5, and here Ferrous again utilizes the Zugzwang, makes the king move away from the defense of the pawn, and now starts promoting a pawn. King e7, and here's a funny move from Ferrous. Most humans here play king c7 and promote a queen. Ferrous here again forces the king into a funny Zugzwang, playing bishop c3. And the point is, if king d8 is played, bishop f6 is just a checkmate. So the king is forced to lose the defense of d8. And now we promote a queen. And now it's obviously winning. Ferrous shuffles for a while, then it figures out how to checkmate here, and after bishop g7, the bishop h6 check, queen g5 is just a checkmate in the center of the board.